right, we want to get back to breaking news this hour on the indictment against former FBI Director James Comey and New York Attorney General Letitia James. A U.S. district judge ruled the appointment of attorney Lindsay Halligan is unlawful, and the judge went on to dismiss the indictment against Comey and James without prejudice. Now, we got a statement from New York Attorney General Letitia James. She says, "I am heartened by today's victory and grateful for the prayers and support I have received from around the country. I remain fearless in the face of these baseless charges as I continue fighting for New Yorkers every single day." CBS News Justice correspondent Scott MacFarlane joins me now for much more on this. Okay, Scott, so can you walk us through the importance of this ruling and what it means for both Comey and James?
These were two landmark criminal cases, uniquely high-profile criminal defendants. They both now have their cases dismissed. And in the case of James Comey, it could be a fatal dismissal to this case. What the judge has done here is dismissed each case without prejudice. When they say without prejudice, that means you can, if you want to, try to refile it, prosecutors, through a different way. But James Comey's different. He's beyond the 5-year statute of limitations for his alleged crime, a crime he denies, making a false statement during this appearance in Congress in 2020. But that notwithstanding, James Comey's opinion, the opinion from the judge in the James Comey case, makes clear she's dubious the statute of limitations can be overcome, that there's a way for the prosecutors to bring that case back. So this could be a complete dismissal for James Comey at the end of the day. For Letitia James, they'll have the opportunity to try to refile it, perhaps with a different set of prosecutors, to bring it back to life. But the issue here is procedural. It's not about the merits of the case. What they're arguing and what the judges agreed to is that this prosecutor is unlawfully appointed. She can't bring the case.
And Scott, there were some issues bringing the case against Comey forward in the first place. Can you walk us through what took so long?
It did come right up against that statute of limitations I mentioned. It was a 5-year mark since that fall 2020 Senate testimony in question. They brought the case in the fall of 2025 with just hours and not days to spare. The backstory here is important. There was a Trump-appointed top prosecutor in the Eastern District of Virginia. He was ousted near that deadline for not bringing the case forward. A new U.S. attorney was installed, a former Trump White House aide, Lindsay Halligan. She brought the case, one of her first orders of business, but she's the only prosecutor who would stand by this case and put her name on it initially. There was no second person. There was no second prosecutor, so if she's not lawfully appointed, that's just damaging and ultimately led to dismissal in both cases.
And Scott, I know we've been talking about the whole idea of selective or vindictive prosecution. Is that something that would have had some stand-in if this case had actually had, the cases had actually had opportunities to be argued on in court?
That's a great question. One of the consequences of this dismissal, one of them, is that the arguments each has made that these were selective, political, vindictive prosecutions ordered by President Trump. Those arguments are, to a degree, highly irrelevant now. The cases are dismissed. There were arguments just last week in Virginia in the James Comey argument of vindictive prosecution. The judge may still issue an opinion on that. I'm not sure if he will still feel inclined to do so. It's all moot. The case is dismissed. But they, of course, can resuscitate those arguments if the new prosecution is somehow brought against either of these two defendants. But that's a really big if.
And what are the chances when we think about the cases against the case against James Comey, the case against Letitia James? Hers is about mortgage fraud, which would have been about, I believe it was $18,000 is what she was being accused of basically stealing with that mortgage fraud case. What are the chances that this cases would have been in front of a judge in the first place, if not for the president pushing for, I guess, the DOJ to go after his political enemies?
Yeah, both of those defendants, James Comey and Letitia James, would say there was no chance this case gets brought forward against anybody else. That's part of an argument. That's a component of a vindictive prosecution argument, that similarly situated people wouldn't face the wrath of the Department of Justice. They both made that argument. There are other people who would have liked to have heard what the judge had to say on that matter, because there are other critics of the president who fear or believe they're soon to be politically prosecuted for alleged wrongdoing. They deny. But at this point, there's no guarantee those opinions will ever be issued because the cases are now toast. They are gone.
And you know, Scott, that was going to be part of my next question for you. What are the consequences, you think, for those other pending DOJ cases against what you would call opponents of the president?
Yeah, there are other critics of the president who fear they're going to be prosecuted. One of them is known. California Senator Adam Schiff has publicly said he fears he's going to be prosecuted vindictively. He's hired a private attorney to begin representing him in case there's a prosecution, but his is differently situated. Although he also denies any wrongdoing, there's some allegation of fraud with a mortgage he denies. His case is not brought by Lindsay Halligan, this U.S. attorney in Virginia who's unlawfully appointed. There's an investigation underway, CBS News has learned, but it's not in Virginia, and it does not involve a potentially unlawfully appointed prosecutor. So a different situation there.
Yeah. Scott MacFarlane, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate your insight. And CBS News legal contributor Caroline Polisi joins me now for much more on this story. Caroline, this ruling does not address the merits of this case. We've been mentioning that. So are future charges possible here?
That's right. As Scott noted, this is purely procedural. A huge win for Comey and James, certainly. Remember, this issue was combined before this judge. So she's ruling on both of these cases about just this narrow issue of whether or not Lindsay Halligan was lawfully acting as the United States Attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia when those indictments were signed. And ultimately, this judge, Judge Curry, found that no, Pam Bondi did not actually have the authority to appoint Lindsay Halligan because it was within this 120-day period under the appointments clause that really she has this power, and you can't end run around the appointments clause by appointing different acting and or interim United States attorneys. So that was really the issue. It's a bit of a technicality, really.
Yeah.
And so when you ask the question whether or not these cases can be brought again, you know, this was not a complete win for Comey and James. They wanted this case dismissed with prejudice. The judge decided to dismiss it without prejudice, which means that DOJ could come back, likely with a different prosecutor, likely not with Lindsay Halligan, because remember, now it's the district court that gets to appoint the interim United States attorney in that district, not Trump, not Pam Bondi. And so whether or not they choose to move forward, we will see. The statute of limitations is a much bigger issue in the Comey case because, you know, as we've noted, it was they indicted, Halligan was appointed on Monday. She indicted on a Thursday, right up against that deadline. There are some arguments that when an indictment is dismissed without prejudice, that regardless of the tolling of, or that essentially the statute tolls for 6 months, they would have 6 months to re-indict. Unclear whether that applies here. We're really in uncharted territory here. But, you know, I'd say very slim chance that the Comey case comes back and less clear with the Tish James case.
I mean, you mentioned, Caroline, uncharted territories here, but I have to ask if the Justice Department does decide that this is a situation they want to bring this case back again. Any chance we'll actually hear of that this year, or is this something we should be watching for next year? Because I know cases can take all these law and all of that, justice system. It takes quite a bit, right?
It does. And, you know, these things take time, which is one of the reasons why, which was one of the arguments James Comey made to dismiss this case on the merits, was that the government didn't take the time that they were supposed to get the warrants to research material that they had seized years earlier. Essentially, they looked through emails and other files without a proper warrant, because that's why these things take time.
Yeah.
Indictments take time. Getting the issues together takes time. And one of the issues that Lindsay Halligan raised that the judge really criticized her for is that she told those grand jurors that if they didn't feel like there was enough evidence to indict before them today on that grand jury charging day, that they could assume that the government had more in their back pocket. That's why this judge really criticized her, saying this is an indict first and investigate later position. So we'll see.
Did anything else from what the judge had to say, did anything else stand out to you in this case?
Yeah, look, judges like to be conservative. I doubt that we will see an answer to the question about that vindictive and selective prosecution. Judges don't like making issuing decisions if they don't have to. It is now really mooted that issue for the Comey case. Appeals will abound here. Rest assured, this ruling will be appealed because remember, there are similarly situated acting United States attorneys in this, of this same ilk, essentially throughout the United States. I think there are 4 now that have this same issue, including Alina Habba in New Jersey. And so, the Justice Department likely would love to get a reversal on this opinion and would love to have something, a higher court essentially saying that they have unlimited ability to reappoint United States attorneys without the consent of the Senate, essentially doing whatever they want and putting in place whomever they want.
And speaking of the vindictive or selective prosecution, a term that I'm sure so many people know about now because we talk about it so much in relation to these 2 cases. If this case is to be, the judge's ruling is to be appealed and both cases are brought back, do you think that's something that both James Comey and Letitia James will still continue to argue, that the cases against them are basically a form of vindictive or selective prosecution?
Oh, absolutely. Those motions are strong. As we often note, those are very difficult motions to make. They're separate motions, both vindictive and selective prosecution. And you don't need to show that you're innocent of the alleged crime. Essentially, you just need to show that the only reason the prosecution was brought was for vindictive reasons and or that similarly situated people in the same position were not targeted. And so, that Truth Social post that we think was supposed to be a private, text to Pam Bondi that Trump, in which Trump really directed her to indict these people. That's gold evidence for vindictive and selective prosecution. The fact that Eric Sieber, the former acting United States attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia, he was pushed out. He was essentially told to resign because he wouldn't bring these cases against these 2 individuals. And so that's very strong evidence of both selective and vindictive prosecutions. And that evidence will be there regardless of who else could potentially be in this seat of prosecuting this case.
Yeah. Caroline Polisi, thank you so much for your insight today. Appreciate your time.